Welcome! We are so glad that you're here today. I hope that you've had a great week. Well, my name is Jeremy, and I get the privilege of being a pastor here at Mosaic. Well, I have a question for you as we start today. Have you ever wondered, why God? Why is this happening to me? Well, today we're going to hear a very interesting story. Our partner pastor, Andy Stanley, is going to be interviewing Stuart Hall. And earlier in March of this year, Stuart was admitted to the hospital for COVID-19. He had a heart attack, was put on a ventilator, and barely survived. And you can imagine when someone goes through that, the questions that come up in their head. Why, God? Why is this happening to me? Am I going to live? The things that go through your head as to what is important in life. And then their family members asking the exact same questions. It's going to be very interesting. We're all going to learn from them as they went through that process. But you can expect that in just a little bit. Before that, though, we have a quick announcement. The Global Leadership Summit is starting again this year online. It's going to be on Saturday, November 21st. It's just 73 dirhams. If you're a leader in Dubai, you don't want to miss it. Some of the greatest leaders in the world are going to give you inspiration of how you can become a better one. Well, that's it for the welcome. We're so glad that you're here. Let's hand it over to Andy and Stuart.
Today, you are in for a real treat. As the nation and as the world continues to be ravaged by COVID-19, I have a dear friend for whom the global crisis became a personal crisis. This past March, I got word that my friend Stuart Hall had tested positive for COVID-19. And when I checked in with Stuart, he was quarantining at home, and his words were, "This thing is no joke." And he was correct. His situation continued to deteriorate. 2 weeks later, his wife Kelly rushed him to the hospital where he was admitted. And, well, in a minute, I'll let Stuart and Kelly tell you what happened next. I've known Stuart and Kelly for many years. They have 3 grown kids. We've spoken at camps together. We've actually exercised and run together. We co-authored 2 books together. Stuart is a phenomenal communicator. Together, he and Kelly have literally impacted thousands of lives and influenced hundreds of adults and students to step across the line of faith. There are church leaders all over the country who point back to a single conversation with Stuart as the catalyst for why they entered full-time ministry. So, with the uptick in the COVID cases and so much mystery surrounding this dangerous virus, I thought it would be great for you to hear their story from them. So, here we go. So Stuart and Kelly, thank you for doing this. And I'm sure you've told your story to so many people privately, so thank you for sharing it with the whole world. And I think the best way to do this is just to start at the beginning and give everybody kind of the timeline, because this journey begins late March into early May. And so let's start with this. You started having symptoms, and like everybody else, all through pollen season, we're all like, oh no, is this that? So what were your symptoms, and just take it from there.
Right. Well, one interesting thing is this: when you look at the spectrum of the virus, my symptoms happened relatively early on comparatively to where we are today. Kelly and I try to exercise, and we had just gone on a 5-mile walk, and I just started feeling weird. I coughed a lot during that walk, and I thought there's one hill that's really steep, and I thought that was the reason why, but I got home that night and just couldn't kick it, and progressively started feeling like I had the flu. The more we heard and read about the virus, the more concerned we became. So 4 days later, on March 29th, we went to the emergency room.
An ER at a hospital.
An ER at a hospital. And even at that time, I think this is lost on the general public that hasn't had a personal experience with this. Even then, Kelly pulled up to the emergency room. I got out of the vehicle, and she had to go and park in the parking lot. She couldn't come in.
And wait, yeah.
And wait. They didn't have enough tests at the time. I didn't have enough symptoms for them to go ahead and admit me. They took an x-ray of my chest. Their words exactly were, we're 97% sure you have the virus, but because you don't have enough symptoms and because we don't have enough tests, we're gonna send you home to self-quarantine. So I went home, stayed in my bedroom the rest of the time until we had to go back, and I progressively got worse. My fever would spike to 104. Kelly could use Tylenol and get it down to like 101, but it never got back to normal. In between all that, on April the 3rd, our general practitioner contacted an infectious disease doctor who prescribed me hydroxychloroquine, which is now a controversial drug, and there are varying opinions.
Right.
What we know happened to me is that I didn't sleep for 72 hours after I started taking that drug.
And so you started taking it how long after you had symptoms?
I started taking it on April the 3rd.
Okay.
So that was
10 days.
about 10 days.
Yeah.
And my heart was racing. I couldn't sleep. I would go from a chair to the bed to a chair to the bed, and it was pretty scary. My fever went away, but my heart was just doing something weird until April the 6th was a really bad day, to the degree that night our son stayed in the bedroom with us. And Kelly, to her credit, I'm just stubborn. We had seen so many stories. We knew that if we go back to the hospital, they're going to intubate me, they're going to put me on a ventilator, and we're going to be separated. And I, being hard-headed and stubborn, was just thinking, okay, let this medicine run its course in my body and I'll be okay.
And at this point, you hadn't tested positive yet, right?
I hadn't even taken a test.
Right.
So early morning, April the 7th, I finally looked at her and said, we need to go to the doctor, we need to go to the hospital. And so she and our son Grant rushed me to the hospital. It was this precarious on the way that she almost stopped at a fire station because I just couldn't breathe.
Wow.
And
can I back up 1 second? So you didn't sleep for 72 hours?
72 hours.
And so Kelly, you have to be thinking through all this. You're taking care of your husband, but you're also thinking if he's COVID-19 positive, perhaps so are you, all the kids. So what?
I think we all knew we had experienced the virus. I had a fever probably a day before him, but mine only lasted, it was very minimal, and it only lasted for a couple of days. And then my children, our two older children, probably like towards that first weekend. So like maybe Thursday, Friday, Saturday, they were kind of just down, didn't feel good, had a little low-grade fever, but then we were all fine.
Wow. And
nothing, any type of symptoms, none of us had.
So you didn't even suspect?
Obviously you're suspecting because you're just going, everything you do at that point and you feel in your body, you're wondering, is this the virus?
Yeah, that makes me feel better, right?
I think everybody in the world is feeling that way.
And I think it was March the 11th, like the National Basketball Association had canceled their season. So that was starting to happen as well.
We had brought both of our daughters had to come home from college. So, it was, the progression was just happening. And then it's just like all of a sudden these symptoms and you're going, no, this can't be. How are we getting this virus? Where did it come from? Who have we been around? And it's just crazy to think that we just couldn't imagine. And then the fact that we live in such a small community, we didn't want to tell people because it feels as if you have leprosy.
Yep.
And we didn't want to freak people out because there's so much unknown, still so much unknown, but we didn't want to just create such chaos. So we didn't tell anyone. We told our family, and we told a couple of friends because at that point we couldn't go to the grocery store any longer.
None of you could?
No.
Or you didn't feel like
we were all quarantined in the house. So we did ask a couple of families to help. Could you bring us this? Could you bring us this? But I asked them specifically, please don't tell, because I didn't want our community to know just because of chaos. Right. I didn't want it to create that much drama.
At the beginning, I mentioned that y'all have 3 adult kids. So catch us up, age of your kids, and then we'll jump back into the story. So Grant is?
25. Just returned from a 2.5-year stint with the Peace Corps in Central America. Our oldest daughter will be 23 this month, Chandler, and she graduated virtually from college during the pandemic. And then our youngest, Cameron, is 20 and is already back at school. She's a soccer player, so they're already training again, which was also,
Part of
a
anxiety.
bit of anxiety sending her back.
So
Yes.
at this point, all 5 of you are at home. Everybody's had mild symptoms. You're wondering, but nobody gets tested. Then Dad gets
Serious
sick.
symptoms.
They prescribe you the drug. You still haven't been tested. You don't sleep for 72 hours. And at some point through all of that, all of us are, getting texts and we're praying and and then, of course, in my mind, it's like, hey, Stuart's young and
Yep.
healthy and he'll get through this. So,
Right.
hey, dude, how's it?
Yeah.
It's kind of casual. But then the messaging ramps up and we know it's serious. So let's go back to that terrible day. You pass the fire station, you think,
Yes.
we're going to make it to the ER.
He was like, no, take me straight to the ER. Don't stop.
And it's good we're stopping there because one thing that's crazy about this story, the last thing I remember is watching the movie Creed on the night of April the 6th. And the next thing I remember is starting to come out of the fog in ICU.
Yeah.
And I've had to be told everything else. So
And that's an important thing for our audience to understand, that from the March or April 7th on, what the rest of this story you only know because
By word of
Kellee
mouth.
and the doctors and some close friends have told you,
Yep.
because essentially you are out of it.
I'm out of it,
So
yeah.
you get to the hospital. He hasn't slept in 72 hours. He's very sick. His heart is racing. What happens?
So they allow me this time to go in with him. And so my son now is sitting in the parking lot by himself. As soon as I go in, they start asking me, of course, we go into a secluded area, and they start asking me every question about his symptoms and what's happening. And then the last thing the doctor says is we've got to intubate him. And I'm like, I
The
figured.
same day?
This was when it was early morning on the 7th. So he's like, we've got to intubate him because his oxygen level was just horrifically low. And I said, I figured you would. And he said, you're going to have to leave now. And I'm like, okay. So the last thing Stuart told me is, you might have saved my life. And they walked me out to the waiting room. And I sat there for probably maybe another 45 minutes. At this point, my daughters had gotten to the parking lot and were sitting with our son. So all 3 of them are sitting in the parking lot, and I'm waiting on somebody just to come tell me the next step. Well, the first person that comes and talks to me is a cardiologist, and Dr. Kakar, and he comes in and says, hey, I want to let you know that either your husband is either having or has had a heart attack, which I'm going, what? I mean, he's a healthy, that never crossed my mind.
Right.
And he said, do we have permission to go in and look? And I'm like, absolutely. So that was another 2.5 probably hours. He comes back finally and says his main artery was 100% blocked. We have put a stent in. He's also in congestive heart failure. So we've put a pump on his heart. At this time, I asked him, could I get my children on the phone that he could tell all of us instead of just me? And he said, yes. So he told us all the information at the same time. Well, my son said, what are his chances of survival? And he said, well, if it was just the heart attack, I'd say 50%. He said, but the fact that he's COVID positive, they're assuming, they have not tested him at this point, but of course, all signs point there. He's been intubated and he's in congestive heart failure. He said, it's not good. I don't give him much. Basically, I don't give him much hope. But then he said, what I will tell you is I'm a man of faith. And he said, at this point, it's time to pray. And I'm like, okay, we can do that.
Yeah. And you may have already been doing some of that, I'm thinking,
I was
right?
we had been definitely praying, but
But to hear a doctor say that,
yes,
so comforting.
and literally, I felt as if he wanted to cry with me, and he wanted to get up and hug me, but we can't do that,
Right.
Because it was just him and I. There was nobody else in the room, and at that point, they allowed me to stay until he got moved to ICU. And when he got moved to ICU, I walked up there. I couldn't see him, but I walked up there. I had to sign release papers, and the lady told me she escorted me out. And I went to the parking lot, met my children. We all got in a car together and just cried. And our older daughter said, can we pray, Mom? And I'm like, absolutely, we can pray. So we did. And then we separated cars and we drove home. And on my drive home, I thought, I haven't told anybody, but now's the time. If we need a miracle and we need to pray, then I'm going to ask every friend that I have to please pray for him. So at that point, I did put it on all social media channels that I had to please pray. And the people just were calling me and texting me. I couldn't believe it, because this was like 5-something in the morning. This was not in the middle of the day. So people were waking up to it.
Yep.
When we got home, we got everything unloaded. I walked upstairs and the sun was rising, and I was looking. I was like, oh, look how beautiful the sun's rising. And when I looked out, my neighbor, which is also a very good friend of our family's, she's sitting on the curb across from our house, just with her Bible open and just praying out loud. And I'm like, I'm just like, what are you doing? She said, I don't know what else to do. And I think that's how everybody felt. And that's how we felt. I mean, we didn't know what else. We were still in quarantine. So no family could be around us. No friends could be around us. We still couldn't go to the grocery store. So it was just
you're
such
isolated.
a strange.
He's isolated. And then you're at this place that, some people have been, perhaps many people, where you're waiting for the call.
Phone to phone to phone, phone call to phone call.
Yeah. So you're on you're on the ventilator, sort of the next part of the story, for a week. So we're from the 7th through the 13th. You're getting calls.
You do. You live from phone call to phone call.
Yeah.
You have a palliative care doctor. Her name is Dr. Syed, and she became a very close part of our family. She started FaceTiming us the next day. They did allow us to take some pictures up to the room so they could actually see him and see us, the nurses and people that were helping.
Yep.
Every time a nurse would come on, I would ask, please tell me your name. And our family wrote their names all on our wall, on a piece of paper on our wall, just because I wanted them to know specifically, we are praying for you by name. Mm-hmm. And I want you to know from our family how much we appreciate you putting your life on the line and your family's life on the line just to care for our loved one.
Yep.
And it means so much to us. And I didn't want to forget that.
And that's a big part of this story.
It is a huge part of the story.
For the community in general, society in general, there have been some, profiles in courage around the medical personnel, but for your family, these are, their names.
They're friends.
They were personal heroes.
They are, and they are a lifeline to the person that we love and are fighting for. So yes, that happened from the next week. There was the community gathered around and tried to do different things. They had a prayer walk. The Florida soccer team created a Zoom call that was prayer for hundreds of people got on. It was overwhelming, the kindness that people were trying because they didn't know what else to do.
And meanwhile, Stuart,
He's just
I just
chilling.
laid
no
there.
idea.
I just laid there.
Yeah.
I had hallucinations that we should not talk about.
Yes.
Why not? So tell us another big part of this for those of us who were, on the outside praying, getting information every once in a while. Tell us the story about the Blue Heart in the window.
The Blue Heart came after the next weekend was Easter weekend. And we didn't know what else to do. You and Sandra had suggested we get our tested in the parking lot of the church. And so we said we were going to do that. And we did that Monday after Easter. But we thought, okay, our symptoms are mild enough. We could at least ride together to the parking lot. We didn't know. We knew he was in room 7. Yeah, we knew he was in room 7 on the 4th floor. I knew what side of the hospital I came out of, but that's all I knew. At this point, we were updating people via social media. So I think some of the people from the hospital started following us and realizing that we were sitting in the parking lot.
Looking up at the side of a hospital, wondering, which window, right?
Yes. And one of his first nurses, her name was Melody, she came back to work after being off. And she brought this poster paper, and it was a blue polka dotted heart, and she put up in his window that faced 400 out in the parking lot, and she told us, I have put this heart in the window so you can know what room he's in. And a small gesture on her part, she's thinking. But for us, it was
huge.
life.
Yeah.
It was so life-giving for me and my children, as well as for the community, friends, family. And then it ended up becoming over social media. Like, this heart represented Stuart. It became like what everybody was praying for, this one heart.
We, among many, many people, and for those of you who are not familiar with the Atlanta area or the part of town that we're talking about, there's a major highway, and the hospital is on the highway. And literally, on the highway, you could glance over at the hospital, and there's that Blue Heart. And like so many, we drove up, sat in the parking lot, prayed for you, looking up at the Blue Heart.
I know, because once I did come out of the fog, this nurse came in my room one day and goes, I don't know who you are.
Yeah.
But I'm pretty sure I just saw Andy Stanley in the parking lot.
I didn't know that part. Yeah. Well,
Praying for you.
Praying for you.
So I'm like, okay. But so that became a lifeline for us. And that ended up the next weekend. The community ended up every 30 minutes, somebody sitting in the parking lot praying. And then also online, or wherever they're from, they could pray wherever they were for 30 minutes, sign up for a 30-minute prayer time. It was, just absolutely amazing and overwhelming how much the community came out and loved and supported online community as well as personal community.
But there was also reason to pray as well, because I would do really, really well and then tank.
And
we would get so hopeful.
Yes.
And we're like, he's coming out of this. And then
they kept saying, which to begin with, there was no hope. Then that first weekend, I think a friend of yours is Dr. Callahan, and he had his associate come in and see him over the weekend. His name is Dr. Jagadesh. And that was the first person that ever gave me hope. He told me on a Saturday, right before Easter, I think he's going to survive. He goes, we're kind of seeing that how he is running this course, that his survival rate is high. I just broke down, started crying on the phone because and he's like, are you okay? I'm like, yes,
no,
but you're the first person that's told me this.
Well, so to drop another important date, if I get this right. So you go in on April 7th. On April 20th, I don't know who told me this story first. There's this moment where there's 6 doctors standing around Stuart, all basically scratching their heads like, we've done everything we know to do. It's been up and down, up and down. Right now, it's just down, and we have run out of options. So tell us a little bit about that. That was a big day.
That was huge. The week before, he had been extubated and re-intubated within 3 hours. It was so
for
drastic.
the non-medical folks, taken off the ventilator,
put back on the ventilator.
Apparently, he got really agitated and wanted to get out of the bed.
And his oxygen dropped again. And they kept saying, leading up to the 20th, they kept saying, 24 more hours, let's give him steroids, 24 for his lungs, 24 more hours. And it kept just progressing to the point where he was on spontaneous meaning that he was breathing on his own on the ventilator for over 24 hours, but they wanted to wait until like Monday. Well, Sunday night, he threw up in his ventilator, and it just created this downward spiral of all complications. From that point, he started bleeding internally. He had ulcers from the ventilator.
My body was septic.
His body was septic. He had a horrific bacterial infection that more doctors and nurses didn't really want to go into his room because of the bacterial infection than the COVID. He had blood clots in his legs, and obviously the blood clot is what created the heart attack. So they had to be very careful about how they treated the GI bleed because of the blood clots, because if you treated one, then you didn't know if the other one was going to dislodge. So, it was at that point, there was like 6 doctors standing over him going, he's dying. What do we do?
Right, because this was that spiral that happens not infrequently, where it just the body
starts
just
breaking
takes
down.
over, and it's a little bit like whack-a-mole. What if we treat one, it's going to make the other worse. So they're standing around the bed, and then a doctor has an idea that made all the difference.
Dr. Harish.
He called me, and he said he basically said, your husband's dying. He's very sick. And I said, yes, I know. And he said, I want to try something. I want to try a plasma exchange. He said it's very low risk. We use it for sickle cell patients, but I think it might work. And if it doesn't, there was no harm.
Right.
And I said, please try it. Whatever you want to do, try it. Do something. And so on Tuesday afternoon, he started the first plasma exchange. Within 24 hours, he was a different person. His eyes had lit up. He was moving his hands. Totally different person. They did another plasma exchange on Wednesday. They thought they were going to do one on Thursday. They said he didn't need one. His numbers had stabilized. They had taken him off like all blood pressure medicine. It was crazy, the difference. On Friday, they extubated him. I didn't tell anybody they extubated him besides my immediate family, just because of what happened in the past.
Yep.
And I didn't want to get hopes up and then have to come back and do another nosedive again. So I kept it quiet until late that afternoon. And from that point on, things just started going so fast. He was sitting in a chair on Saturday. The physical therapists had him sitting up in a chair for like an hour on Saturday after he was extubated on Friday. Sunday, I took his phone to him. He's FaceTiming us himself.
So is that when you went to the ICU and got to see him for the first time?
That was a little bit later because then.
So this is all within a week. Because I remember getting the text, and it was like, wait a minute, we're planning, we're mentally planning a funeral. It was.
It was bad.
Right.
It was bad. I remember walking down our street and I wasn't really making eye contact with people. And one of the neighbors says, "How are things today?" And I just started crying. I said, "It's not good. It's not good." And at that point, the turnaround was so drastic. His palliative care doctor thought he's about to turn a corner. He can go one or two ways. And she got permission for me to come spend 45 minutes with them.
So this is your first time to see him
since
in 3?
April, at least 20-something days.
Wow.
I thought it was just a really attractive nurse out in the hallway. and then I'm like, there was a nurse in my room, and I'm like, I think that's my wife.
So you're
At
becoming
this point,
aware.
I'm coming out of the fog. And and I still am. It's hard for me to talk about. I was so emotional because I couldn't put the pieces together of where am I, and I had a heart attack. And
he couldn't understand why we weren't there.
Right. So her coming in the room and just being able to touch her and kiss her, and then for her to kind of explain, this is what's going on. It's the brilliance and wisdom of Dr. Saya, because she just called it. She's like, this is what he needs. He needs his wife.
And with that, in regard to that, I had to, there was a couple of situations that happened, but on my way, of course, I thought I threw all risk out the window when she called and said, "I've got a surprise for you." So I'm like, yes, I'm in the car. I'm on the way to the hospital. Well, my son calls Dr. Syed as I'm driving to the hospital and wants her to explain to him why it is okay for me to come now when I couldn't come all this time.
Right.
And then could she promise him that he was going to take care of me? What were you going to do to take care? Because I didn't even think about it, but like, your dad's almost dying and now your mom's going to be put at risk. Mm-hmm. That didn't even cross my mind. I'm just thinking, I get to see Stuart. I'm going. Which when I got to the hospital, Dr. Syed was like, "Your son just called."
He's looking out after mom.
Yeah.
Yes, he was.
And then 2 days.
I had to garb up, which
to go in,
totally.
Well, no wonder you didn't recognize her, right?
Well, and it does. I think it changed her perspective.
It changes your perspective towards the nurses and the doctors to understand the layer of clothing that you have to put on to even walk into the room, and that you have to take all those layers off to leave the room before you can go into another room
and start the process over again.
Yes, it was unbelievable.
Wow.
The experience of that.
And then, if I have this correct, 2 days later, they bring Stuart out into
ICU.
the parking lot. Is this?
He leaves ICU.
I leave ICU, and I think we do have video of this.
Oh yeah. Let's just stop and let everybody watch this, because so this is the moment. Then they're bringing you out of ICU to take you to
a regular
room.
Mm-hmm.
We're on FaceTime, so we're watching the whole thing.
Right.
They're playing the Rocky theme.
They're playing the Rocky theme.
So let's just roll that. I think everybody will appreciate this. Watch this.
Woo!
First of all, thank y'all for what you do for my family, but also thank you for completely humiliating me right now. Thank you very much. Thank you.
You're welcome. Well, you had a team rallying around you out there.
Yeah, we all saw that, and I mean, we all cried. I just don't. I remember Sandra and I saw it. I cried. I said, Sandra, have you seen this? We cried. It felt miraculous as we, day by day.
And one of the things you'll notice if you watch that video closely is when they bring me out of the room, I'm clapping. And I was clapping because this was really a celebration of all those men and women who fought for my life. It wasn't for me. And I had such a hard time talking because I just was looking in the faces of people, as Kelly said earlier, that had risked their life to save my life. When you think about Jesus saying, there's no greater love than this, than someone would lay down their life for a friend. I think from now on, every time we think about doctors and nurses, that's what we're going to think about. And that's what I was thinking about rolling out of there. Was these men and women are clapping for me. Survivors get way too much credit. It's the men and women and, friends like you and all over this country that prayed and loved me home. That's what that parade was about. And I'm just so humbled and grateful for that sacrifice. We can't be the same after that.
And for the nurses and doctors that day that stood in the hallway, I think it's hope. And that what keeps them going is the one piece of hope that one person is leaving room 7 and is going to a regular room.
Wow. So from that point on, you're conscious of the journey from that point forward.
Relatively conscious. Yeah.
You couldn't see, right?
I was having a difficult time seeing. And all joking aside, I thought when I was in the medically induced coma, I thought I was a part of a drug cartel war. I got stuck in a Tyler Perry sitcom I couldn't get out of. The worst was I was underneath a plexiglass floor underwater, and people were walking and talking above me. I had on an oxygen mask, but I couldn't find a way out.
Oh, God.
So as you're coming out of the fog, reality didn't make sense. But once I got into a regular room, I was able to, the more that medicine got out of your body, the physical therapist, all of that.
The reason they allowed us to see him outside was because they did think they were going to have to take him to acute therapy where he would have to stay for another week or two. And he was fighting them so hard. And I'm like, he will do the right thing if he can just let him see us. Yep. If he can see us and touch us, then he will do the right thing if that's what you feel like he needs to do.
I just wanted to be able to tell my kids that I'm going to be okay.
And
so that was on.
They got permission to bring him out the 30th.
The 30th, April 30th. So they bring you outside in the parking lot.
Yes.
You
freezing
still can't go in.
in.
And this is the first time your kids have seen you. And I guess the second time Kelly's seen you since since she said goodbye to you. That.
And I had, I sat them down after the crying and the hugs and kisses. I just sat them down and said, I'm going to be okay, but this is what I think I'm going to have to do. I'm going to have to go to acute physical therapy. And this is crazy. The two physical therapists that wheeled me down took me back up to my room. And one of them said, Stuart, have you walked without your walker? And I said, yeah, I have. She's like, well, show me, right when I got to the room. And I walked across the room. And she said, you don't need acute physical therapy.
Oh, wow.
And so from that
2 days
point
later,
on,
he came home.
yeah,
When did he come home?
May 2nd, 2 days later.
2 days later.
Yeah.
all of our friends and family had lined
The parade.
The
Oh,
parade,
Yeah, it was a
And-
big deal.
Yeah.
Big deal.
And they were, what's so sweet is our friends feel just as much celebrated as he did, because I think this was a fight we dug in and we're fighting on his behalf.
Yeah.
You know, and it was just a humongous celebration of he did it. He made it. He's alive. He's here. And to actually see a miracle walking, and we felt, you know, I don't even know what the number is today, but 32,000 people have died. And why God chose to save him, you know, we couldn't understand that. And we couldn't understand just the despair that these people and these families, because of what we felt, but then that they had to say goodbye, that we felt so unworthy that we're getting to celebrate him, but we're also so grateful.
Yeah.
And to walk in the midst of that, of knowing that, thank you, God, for saving him. And then the reality that other people, so many other thousands of people have walked through where they did not have our reality.
So before we wrap up, I do want to ask some specific questions, really as this whole event intersects with your faith. As I mentioned when we started, I mean, both of you have been doing ministry for many, many years. You've taught all kinds of things. You've navigated people through all kinds of things as a pastor. But this was your time. Suddenly, you're in the valley, literally the valley of the shadow of death, and now you're on the other side of it. And as you alluded to earlier, Stuart, you can't come through this unmarked. So, Kellee, I want to start with you. When you told the story before, you said there was a moment you were on your porch, and it was during a sunrise, and you had kind of a breakthrough. You described it as sort of this intimate moment with God as your questions and fears, everything kind of comes crashing in.
It did. I think the whole time from the very first night, I was confident that God could heal him, but I didn't know if he was going to choose to. And my couple of things through the whole process is, with my family, is I didn't want this to tear us apart, and I did not want my relationship to God to change, for them to see a change in me regardless of the outcome. And that was my two biggest, strongest things through the whole process. The night that he threw up in his ventilator, I couldn't go back to sleep, and so I got up and I just sat outside, had a cup of coffee, and the sun was coming up, and I just felt like I just said, all right, God, this is it. We've gone up and down, and here we are, and we're at a crossroads. I don't want to give him up, but I will. And this is, I feel like you can have him if that's what you want. And the day before, I had read something from Bob Goff, and it says, hope doesn't go to sleep just because it's dark outside. It lights a candle and stays up, waiting for the rest of the story. Are you living in anticipation of God surprising you? This is a place where God meets us in the power of the resurrection. It's in the dark places. He finds us in the places between the miracles.
Wow.
And I didn't know what miracle I'd come from and what miracle I was headed to, but I knew I was in that middle. And I knew that was the only thing I had to hold on to. I would sit in the parking lot and I would scream Psalms 91 at the window, just saying, I declare, in every one of those verses. And then I would scream, This Is a Move by Tasha Cobbs Leonard, and just scream at the top of my lungs, we need a move in room 7.
Yeah.
I knew he was capable. I knew he could perform a miracle, but I didn't know if he was going to choose to. And when I'm looking around at all the death, and I'm thinking, why would he choose to save him and not all these other people?
Right.
And so many people would call us and say, God is just going to give him such a great testimony This is going to be such a great testimony. I can't wait to hear him talk about it or write a book. And my children would go.
In the middle of it.
In the middle of it. And my children would go, that has got to be the cruelest thing someone could ever say. Why would God do this to our dad so he'd have a better testimony? And finally, I got to the point where I would say to people, I appreciate what you're saying, but I'm very confident that Stuart served God before in his life, before this happened. And regardless of this had happened or not, this would not have changed the love he has and the relationship he has with God.
Wow.
And I don't know that it will make it different if he survives. I'm pretty confident that he'd be content, him and I, to sit in our house in Beaufort, Georgia, and never go anywhere else ever again if he survives through this. But that was my moment that I had of clarity of God had not given me an answer one way or the other, but I knew there was little small things he was showing me throughout the whole process, but I didn't know which direction it was headed.
And the thing that's so important about this, listening to you say it, is that is faith.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
because this is something we've talked about in the past. You know, there's a theory of faith that faith is like a power, and if you have enough faith,
yes,
you know, God has to or God's going to. And that is not a New Testament version of faith. It is exactly what you said, Kelly. Faith is, God, I have confidence in you. And whatever you choose to do or not do, I have confidence in you. I don't have confidence in an outcome. I have confidence in the one who controls outcomes. Yeah. And the thing that our audience may have missed in all this all happened during the Easter season.
Yes,
right.
yes.
I mean, you're in the middle of this
Yes.
as the world is celebrating a resurrection and the foundation of our faith. This is suddenly Easter takes on
Yes.
a new significance.
I read this week, and I think this parallels with what you're saying. The writer posed this question: have you placed your trust in your theology or the God of your theology? And that's really easy for us to get confused. And the way that Kelly and our children have really inspired me is exactly what you're saying. The writer of Hebrews says that we can approach the throne of God with confidence, and he'll give us grace and mercy. But those are not the outcomes we really desire. What we want to do is go, well, no, we want him to live, and we want him to be completely healthy. And the writer of Hebrews goes, you can have confidence that he's going to give you grace to go through whatever it is that you're going to go through. Yep. And he's going to be merciful to you in that process. And it pushes against this. If we get really honest, I think all of us, we tend to live, our faith winds up being a churched up version of the American dream.
Yep.
With just enough Jesus to make it seem legitimate. And what's happened to us is that that's been knocked out from under us. And now you go, okay, are we going to trust Jesus? Are we going to lean the full weight of our life on him? Or are we going to trust what we think about him or what we believe about him? And those are two different things. That's the way I feel like Kelly is still inspiring me. That whole idea.
Well, that moment is, I mean, when you said, God, I'm giving him to you, that is an essential part of every extraordinary story of faith. Is, Heavenly Father, you know what I want. You know what I want for the kids. You know what would be easier. I'm not going to hold you to that. I trust you. That is New Testament faith. Stuart, this may be sort of an odd question, but is there anything, and you've kind of covered this, is there anything you want everybody to understand about the virus? I mean, there are so many theories. There's every perspective in the world on COVID-19 and what it means and what's behind it. And it's been politicized. What thoughts on that?
I spent all last summer with youth leaders from all across the country talking about this thing that the opposite of shallow isn't deep. The opposite of shallow is personal.
Okay, say that again. The opposite
of shallow isn't deep. We think that the opposite of shallow is deep. The reality is that the opposite of shallow is personal. Once something becomes personal to you, it becomes deep.
Gotcha.
And this is the harsh reality. Once this virus became personal to us, it becomes deep. And I think our deepest conviction is not for people necessarily to feel sorry for me or to be even excited for me, even though I appreciate that. Our deeper conviction, we feel like it is because it's real. It's not a conspiracy theory. This is not a political agenda. And more than anything, Andy, it's incredibly disrespectful to the medical community. Men and women who are risking their own life to save lives.
To save strangers.
To save strangers. That's the thing I hope and pray we can get. And it really does reveal what may be America's fundamental character flaw. And that is, we have a difficult time considering other people before ourselves.
That might be universal.
It may be universal.
It is certainly American.
It is very, yes. Yeah. But that, at the crux of it all, is what we have experienced as people being selfless toward us, whether it's through their prayer, love. You know, James said, you show me your faith, I'll show you my deeds. You know how grateful I am that men and women who are working in the hospital didn't just pray for me. Like, they put feet to their faith and worked and fought for me. That's the thing I hope people get. That, and Kelly did such an unbelievable job of celebrating the medical personnel too, of feeding the ER team and the ICU team while I was in the hospital, things I didn't even know were going on, just because that was kind of becoming apparent to her as well, that this thing is real. We could show you texts and emails we've gotten just this week from our palliative care doctor who's like, pray for us. We're exhausted. We keep losing people. So that's what I would say, that at the bottom rung of our humanity is put a mask on, care about your neighbor. And then obviously more than that, past that.
Yeah. Kelly, at some point in this journey, and I don't know where this was in the sequence, you had a conversation with your kids. Again, they're all in their 20s. Everybody's still single. They're watching their mom, who's also a wife, and you know, you're in both of these roles, but you're intensely in each of these roles. You're parenting, because for those of you with little kids, parenting never ends, right? Our kids are in their 20s. But you had a conversation with them about marriage. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I wanted my kids to understand at that moment that regardless of what happened to their dad, I wanted them to feel confident in our relationship, that if he was not to survive, that I have been loved more than 99.9% of the marriages in the world, that we left no regret out there, that the love he has given me in our life and the fight that we have had for our relationship and our marriage was a beautiful thing. And I just wanted them to hear me verbally say that if this is the way this goes and he doesn't come back, I am content that I have been loved well.
Wow. That there wasn't anything unresolved.
Nope.
There's no regret.
And he always told me, and because of the fact that he travels, I think we talked about death a lot, just not knowing what would happen one day. And if this happens, and he always told me, if something happens to me, know that I'm fighting to get back to you and to the kids. Know that I will fight with everything I have. And so I knew that. I was very confident, because he's told me that numerous times. But
usually after I watch the movie Taken.
Yeah, that and Jaws pretty much changed my
exactly
life, right? You know.
But my children looked at me and said, Mom, we've never doubted. We know that. So that was a very special moment.
Wow. Well, to know that they've seen that, it's huge.
Yeah.
So Stuart, I want to wrap up with, I think, maybe the hardest question or the biggest question. One of the mysteries of our faith is the providence of God. Who's in charge? The sovereignty of God. You know, what role do we have? And you touched on this earlier. You know, did God cause this to happen? Do you just respond to what happens? Is life random? How has this event changed your view of the sovereignty of God or God's activity in the world? I mean, how
Yeah.
The whole issue of certainty. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, Kelly and I had already been wrestling with that a little bit. We did have a window of time as empty nesters where she would travel with me when I would go and speak different places. And the more we've been around the country, the more we've talked to people, the more I started feeling really antsy about this reality that, and this sounds really harsh, Andy, but I feel like we've made an idol out of certainty. And an idol isn't an idol because it has a particular, property to it. An idol is an idol because of the value you place on it.
Right.
And so much of our existence revolves around security and certainty. And what I think has happened in our life as a result of this is this unveiling of the fact that you've got your value on the wrong things. The only thing you can trust, the writer of Hebrews says Jesus is the same yesterday, today, and forever. He doesn't say your circumstances are, doesn't say your marriage will be, doesn't say your health will be, doesn't say your children will be, doesn't say your country will be, doesn't say the economy will be. Jesus is the same yesterday, today, and forever. So the question becomes then, why would I lean my life on anything but him? Do I think that God made this happen? It's such an interesting tension, because to believe in an all-knowing God is to believe that God knows everything. I don't know if God made it happen. I do know he wants to make it matter. And because he wants to make it matter, I think she and I feel this almost like this burden that we've got to join him in whatever it is that he's trying to do because of the story, because of what it is that he's done in our life. And what we don't want to do, it's interesting when uncertainty happens, I think we all have this propensity, wherever there's a contradiction, we'll set up an opposition to it. Like if something contradicts our certainty, like with COVID, for example, it's a contradiction in our certainty. So we go, well, it's a conspiracy theory or it's a political agenda.
Yeah, there's something in us that has to reconcile everything with our worldview.
Correct.
Otherwise, we feel like we're crazy.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But if our worldview is too small to reconcile everything with, the problem is our worldview. And for Christians, that oftentimes intersects with a problem with our theology.
Right.
So this is such a big deal. I don't want to interrupt.
The only way I would end is, like, I've found myself over the last, so this is my 10th week out of the hospital. The last 2 weeks I've been looking and re-examining the story of Job. Not that I was anywhere close to Job.
Maybe.
Well, yeah. But
it feels very Jobish to the rest of us.
It does feel very
right?
Jobish.
Yeah.
Or my dad would say Jobish.
Jobish, yeah.
But one interesting thing about that story, in the epilogue, Job says something to God that I haven't gotten over. He said, I have heard about you for a long time, but now I've seen you with my own eyes.
Wow.
That's where I kind of feel like we are. Like, I've heard about all this, but now I've seen him with my own eyes. Why would I trust anyone but him? Because he's the only thing that doesn't move. He's the only thing that doesn't change. And he's really the one working this in and through us for his own good. Paul says that it works together for good. He doesn't say that everything is good. Not one time have we asked, not because we're more spiritual than anybody, but I haven't asked, why me? I'm like, okay, how do we make this matter? Because she said it best. Like, Andy, that's probably the hardest part for me, is why am I still alive? And all these people who have every reason to be alive have passed away. I don't think God made that happen. He just wants us to make it matter. That's kind of probably where we've landed.
No, that's a big thought. Go ahead, Kelly.
The blue heart, we ended up framing it.
I'm sure.
Because as we left the hospital, all the nurses and doctors signed it and wrote like a note to him. And for us, it's become like our 12 stones. And it's I don't ever want to forget two things: what God did, and then what this population of doctors and nurses, just the human decency that they loved us so well and cared for us so well, that helped create the miracle.
If we're not careful, I've said this in a couple of interviews, I think it's a Romanian French playwright that says that over-explanation separates us from astonishment. And we are a culture that has to have an explanation for everything. And there's just no explanation except God. There really isn't. And the faith of people who put their feet to what they believed in.
Yep. Well, I don't know if this will feel awkward or not, but I would like to close by giving you an opportunity just to straight to camera address our audience. And you've said so much. You may want to repeat something you've already said, or there may be kind of a closing final thought. But if you were sitting over a coffee table with our audience, either single men and women, married men and women, seniors, high school students, college students, and you had your, here's your...
The elevator pitch.
The elevator pitch, yeah, this final moment. What do you say?
I would probably say that I think we have the wrong job description for love. As humans, we're always trying to avoid pain. As parents, we're always trying to protect our children from pain. As friends, we're always trying to fix each other's pain. And no wonder we always feel like failures, because life it's the human drama. It's pleasure and pain. And the question I would have you wrestle with is just simply this: what are you going to trust in when that pain happens, when your certainty is made uncertain? Are you going to lean your life on your own understanding, your own ability to reason, your own ability to wrap this up and put a bow on it? Or will you trust your life to the only one that doesn't change, that doesn't move, and can actually heal you of your pain, can heal you and your hurt? The last thing I would say is that your love for Jesus doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be true. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be true. So I implore you, if you're not a Jesus person, you don't follow him, would you consider what it is you're leaning your life up against? And if you are a Jesus person, you do follow in the way of Jesus, how much are you trusting him? Are you trusting what you know about him, or are you really trusting him? That's my prayer for people, that they would lean their life, the full weight of their existence, on him.
Wow. Well, before we go, I'd love to pray for all of us. So let's pray. Heavenly Father, just grant us the courage to do exactly what Stuart suggested, what men and women who have followed you since the very beginning have done. As Kelly said earlier, to open our hands and say, thy will be done. You know what we want, you know what I want, but ultimately we want to want what you want. So Father, give us the wisdom to know what to do with what we just heard, and then just give us the courage and the insight to simply do it. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you.
Thank
Thanks
you
so much.
Thank you.
So many of you guys have been praying for me over the last month and a half as I've fought coronavirus and a COVID-19 induced heart attack. I just wanted you to know how much my family and I appreciate it. I am home. I'm on the mend. Rehab is absolutely kicking my tail, but it's a beautiful kind of pain. And hopefully I can see you guys soon. We love you. Thank you again. Thanks for being Jesus to us.
worthy of every song we could ever sing, worthy of all the praise we could ever bring, worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. Jesus, the name above every other name. Jesus, the only one who could ever save. Worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. Oh, we live for you. Holy, there is no one like you. There is none beside you. Open up my eyes in wonder. Show me who you are and fill me with your heart and lead me in your love to those around me. Worthy of every song we could ever sing, worthy of all the praise we could ever bring. Oh, worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. Oh, Jesus, the name above every other name. Jesus, the only one who could ever save. Worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. Oh, we live for you. Holy, there is no one like you. There is none beside you. Open up my eyes in wonder. Show me who you are and fill me with your heart and lead me in your love to those around.
Well, thank you, OJ and Dina. That was amazing. What a great reminder where we can rely on, we can trust our God, that He is the foundation that we can build our life on. Well, thank you guys so much for being here today. I hope that you enjoyed it. Please do us a favor, click subscribe, click on the little bell notification, let you know every single time that we put out a video. We try to do helpful content for you each week. Thanks for being here, and we can't wait to see you all again next week. Take care.